Across its two-part series, Rebel Moon spent 4 hours conveying a poorly written rehashing of Seven Samurai with quite a few elements that felt like they were copy-pasted straight from Star Wars, Warhammer 40,000, and even Chronicles of Riddick. Zack Snyder was responsible for nearly every creative role in the development of this effort to carve chunks out of classics and mold them into something he could put his name on 5 times, but somehow that wasn't enough. Now he's taken the 4 hours of PG-13 mediocrity and made it 50% longer for 6 hours of R-rated debauchery that is, surprisingly, an almost watchable film. So how does this hour of additional content across each of the 2 movies actually improve the final products? Well, the short answer is, it doesn't. At least not most of it. Especially in Rebel Moon Part 1, where the bulk of the additional content is extraneous backstory that has little to no bearing on the rest of the narrative or establishes any beneficial new character development. Now, instead of opening on a giant space vagina and heading straight to Scargiver Butella farming poorly, there's a 20-minute scene that just seems to serve as a demonstration piece for the new R rating. The battle scenes have gone from a pointless ballet of flipping stunt doubles to a gory mess of blood that for some reason looks like it's made out of gack, with people's entire torsos disappearing from some of those goop shooting weapons. But if that wasn't enough to earn that capital R, they threw in plenty of full frontal nudity to try to give it that classic bargain bin Game of Thrones feel. It also uses this new introduction to bring in an odd, quasi-religious tooth harvesting plotline that these mask guys use to make a morbid macaroni painting. It pops up probably 3 or 4 more times just to go absolutely nowhere, and I'm guessing was just added for a little extra gross out factor. When we do get back to the original movie, there's little to be said about the changes made. Additional dialogue makes the most uninteresting parts of the movie even less interesting. What was once a pointless off-screen implied sex scene with a background character becomes a gratuitous on-screen Skinamax sex scene with a character that's still relegated to the background for most of the movie. There's only one other noteworthy scene with this character where 40 seconds of barely necessary conversation becomes a 2-minute conversation reaching the same conclusion. But when those Snyderistic ultra slow motion action scenes from the original movie return, they're just as slow as they were before, but now with the much more impactful and justified violent nature of people being hit with axes and gack-filled goop shooters. However, when they made their way to the totally original Cantina segment, I really hoped they'd do more with all these cool alien creatures. Yet they just included one scene where the bartender talks to a space hooker about being a space hooker, and it culminates with an additional scene of a robotic space hooker walking out of the bar and looking to the side. Snyder maintained essentially all of the original movie, dialogue digging into subjects that have no bearing on the story, Charlie Hunnam's terrible Irish accent, so much depth of field blur that anyone at the edge of the screen might as well not even be in the movie, and the strange Ocean's 11-esque gathering of warriors with extended scenes that fully justified why they were cut in the first place. And it all reaches the same conclusion in the same way, except for an even more excessive demonstration of why this space Nazi should have been way deader than he ultimately was. The running theme of Snyder Moon Part 1, The Cut, is that every new and extended scene is just a reiteration of elements that were already clearly stated in the previous movie. Even that already fucked up tentacle porn scene is now even more fucked up and something that I'll never be able to remove from my mind when seeing Ed Skrein. However, the Snyder Cut of Part 2 is a bit of a different story. The extra hour tacked onto it almost feels like it was tacked on with a purpose other than just seeing how many tacks they could use. Rather than just opening on the mysterious process of the head space Nazi having his red lights pumped out and blue lights pumped in, they actually demonstrate a bit of what's happening and tie it in with the purpose of the ship's living statue creature. And when you see how it's powered by human bones instead of what previously just looked like coal, and how it produces the space vagina they use to travel, the whole thing seems a lot more, R-rated. Of course, there are plenty of additional scenes that don't serve the plot at all, including these weird Uruk-hai guys that spy on Farmville in an effort to relay the information to the space Nazis. And in the 3-day race to harvest all of the grain with medieval techniques and futuristic hover carts, they still block out enough time to turn another off-screen bang into an on-screen 4-minute party of heavy breathing and thrust-free sex. But when they do get back to that wheat extravaganza, they manage to make the already ridiculous montage of reaping, threshing, winnowing, milling, and bagging feel like a full-blown documentary on how to harvest grain inefficiently. Not much changes in the subsequent montage of combat training, but when all of the heroes sit down to engage in their individual flashbacks, old Snyderman finally found a place where additional content had a positive impact, even though half of that is just inserting a couple of cool-looking action scenes. But the big one is Cora Arthelea Scargiver Butella being given more context to her flashback story and a description that, when combined with the first flashback story, actually has the foundation of the story making sense. All of this captures the first 90 minutes of a 3-hour affair that could have easily been 30 minutes. However, the next 90 minutes of this 2-movie experience that's as long as 3 movies is the only part that feels like an actual movie. When the action kicks off this time, the R rating finally stops being an excuse to make you feel awkward when watching this with other people in the room. The battle scenes are now more impactful, with people on both sides looking like they're actually fighting instead of shooting at strategic points on the ground. The space Nazis don't act like a totally inept fighting force, and the farm villagers seem like they're getting straight up slaughtered for most of the fight, even with General Jaimon Hansu's incredible tactics of running straight out into the open while screaming. However, even in the most improved portions of these films, there are still some added parts that definitely aren't necessary. For instance, when they're infiltrating the battleship, which I just realized was another copied Star Wars scene, they added a part where they don their disguises, which was completely unnecessary and ruins the extremely mild surprise of seeing their plan unfold. And there's a whole new scene added where, instead of the bombs causing the ship's cannon fire to miss, Skywalker Butella gets off the elevator at a different stop to blast all the gunnery people. Then she turns the gun on the command deck, which inexplicably isn't locked out like turreted weapons were all the way back in World War II, and blasts it. And again, this doesn't really add anything to the movie and just made me ask more questions that will never be answered. Yet aside from some weird extra bits with that living statue engine, the only alien in the entire second movie now dying, and one more awkward singing part, the ending is essentially the same. It's still set up for a sequel, but in the most flaccid way possible. Though they did add this tiny epilogue scene with the mostly unseen main antagonist that at least gives you a sense of there being some conflict if a future movie ever did join this strange, expensive Netflix experiment and letting Zack Snyder scrape the bottom of the creative barrel. Rebel Moon: The Snyder Cut. 2 hours of content turned into a 6-hour duology perfect for falling asleep on a Friday night. The newly cut and newly named versions of these films are, without a doubt, better movies. However, it's definitely not because they're longer. There were a handful of worthwhile scenes added, like ones that give the powerful sentient robotic guard Jimmy more screen time and context, which also let Anthony Hopkins shine as more than a narrator lore dumping on the viewer before they even knew what they were watching. Yet for every one of these positive additions, there are 5 more that add nothing, have no consequence, and could have stayed on the cutting room floor. When you consider the implication that this was supposed to be the original cut Zack Snyder salvaged from the authoritarian grip of Zack Snyder, that theory seems less believable when there are so many parts that look like they were added last minute in post-production with George Lucas-style janky CGI. The result of this is a cut that isn't a cut at all, and that's frustrating when one of the biggest issues was that the movies were already too bloated. If you strip down the tedious conversations, put in only the necessary flashbacks, eliminated pointless montages, and kept the addition of more tangible violence that made the combat scenes have some impact, these Snyder cuts might have been shorter rather than longer. In fact, you could easily watch only the second movie without missing anything significant that happened in the first. This version of Rebel Moon is the better Rebel Moon, but it definitely could be a better Rebel Moon. If there's a future where the unconfirmed continuation of this saga is confirmed, my biggest hope is that they continue from these versions and forget the originals ever existed. But I also hope that Netflix can bring someone in on the project that will sit down with Zack Snyder and write a script with plot points that matter and aren't just 30 minutes of close-up wheat shots. After 10+ hours of suffering through Rebel Moon, it may finally be over. But if you want to check out the previous videos on these awful Snyder visions, they're right here. And if you'd like to see some other hot takes, warm satire, and tepid commentary on games and movies, like this video and subscribe to Abbreviated Reviews.